travel, I've had my share of bear, and I've been everywhere. I'm in the Fayette, Fairport, Faithorn, Iron Mountain, Flat Rock, Freda, Ishpeming. Hi, this is Jim Islip with MSU Extension, and this is What's Up at UPREC on September 10th, 2021. Today we'll visit with UPREC Director Dr. James Dedecker about a couple of projects here at the south part of the research facility.
We're out here at the UPREC South Farm looking at a project in coordination with Dr. Kim Cassida and the forage industry in an effort to try to develop a forage grass maturity rating system or index that could be used across brands and across species to try to rate maturity. So, in a lot of crops, when you go to purchase seed or plants, you get so many days to maturity or other relative maturity ratings like we have in soybeans, for example. They give you a sense of how long it's going to take from planting or from transplant to get to harvest. In forage grass, we don't have that, and one of the main challenges is that we're dealing with a perennial crop. So it's responding to the environmental conditions and the weather in a given season, and it's going to mature potentially at different rates, depending on the location. So we're talking really about a relative maturity rating system that we're hoping to develop. Right now, if you buy forage grass, the company will usually give you some maturity information, but they're going to say this variety is later than variety X or earlier than variety Y. And the problem is that rating, that relative rating that's happening is really within brands at this point. It's not necessarily something universal. You can take that information and compare one brand to another brand. So what we have here is about 2,000 individual grass plants. These were planted as plugs 2 weeks ago. They were raised from seed out in Oregon and then shipped here to UPREC. And Dr. Kim Cassida came up with one of her students 2 weeks ago, and we spent a day putting these plugs in. There's about, I think, 8 species here and several varieties of each. Each plot from stake to stake is 10 plants of a particular variety. And we've got blocks of species and then varieties randomized within that. So our task for the next 2 years with support from MSU Project Green is to take heading dates on each of these individual plants. So we'll be coming out and looking for the point at which we have 3 tillers or 3 stems on the plant that have a fully emerged seed head. And that is what we're marking as that heading date or maturity date that will then go into the database. As you can see, we've got a pretty wide spacing here. I think it's 3 feet between rows and 2 feet between plants. That is so that we can distinguish the individual plants here when we're doing our ratings, but it's going to be a real challenge for weed control. You can see we've already got a flush of broadleaf weeds coming in here since planting, and our thought is probably a combination of cultivation and herbicide to try to control the weeds in here, but it is going to be a significant challenge to keep this weeded because of the spacing. This is a multi-state and a multi-partner project. I mentioned the forage industry is involved, as well as researchers and universities, and there are sites across the country that are doing the same work to try to develop this system. And obviously we're going to have location differences, environmental differences, but hopefully the relative ratings, at least the ranking of maturities, should hold up across locations. Here we may see that our heading dates are more compressed because of the dramatic shift that we go from our short days in the winter to long days in the summer. Other locations, that may be spread out a little bit longer, but at least hopefully the rankings of how the maturities line up for the different varieties should be somewhat consistent. So we're just getting started on this with planting this fall. We'll start rating next spring, and we'll be at this for at least 2 years, but it should be a really neat project with national and potentially international significance. If this thing works out, it could be a real game changer for the forage grass industry. Something else that we've been up to this year at UPREC, actually for the 2nd year, is an effort to screen a wide range of heritage Flint corns. This is in collaboration with Dr. Frank Kutka at College of Menominee Nation, and we're also expanding this partnership out with a number of tribal partners and other public corn breeders across the Midwest and Northeast. So Flint corn is different than most of the corn that you see. It's not dent corn used for feed. It's not sweet corn used for human consumption. These are corns that were traditionally dried after harvest and used as flour. So they're ground into flour and used to make various food products with from there. There's 57 varieties here. Each row is a different variety, and these came out of the USDA GRIN seed bank. So we put in a request for material that Frank had identified that might be appropriate for this geography and met some of the characteristics that we're looking for. These varieties come from different places in what is now the United States and Canada. Many of them are named for tribal communities from whence they came. It's pretty interesting to see that a number of them are named after places where we don't grow a lot of corn anymore, like the northern upper Midwest and even southern Canada. And so it's interesting to see the diversity of traits in this kind of population here. Many things that you do not see in modern corn, either field corn or sweet corn. One difference is in stature. We've got some varieties that are very short and some that are very tall. A number of them produce quite a few stems or tillers and set multiple ears, which you don't necessarily see in corn these days. And of course, as heritage Flint corns, they come in all different shapes and sizes of the cobs themselves, and also many different colors in the kernel. So this will be a virtual rainbow here. And what we're doing initially is just screening the material. We're looking at basic characteristics of height, maturity, disease resistance, lodging, or whether they're going to have good standability or not. Just an effort to kind of narrow down the set of material that we might want to work with moving forward. This group is investigating long-term the idea of a participatory breeding project. And what that means is, rather than an individual breeder going through a population, making selections, making decisions, we want to try to work with the communities, the indigenous communities from whence this material came, and try to work with them to identify which lines are most appropriate for their use and their environment, and then maybe do some breeding moving forward to make some crosses or at least seed increases to try to move some of these varieties forward and make them more accessible for the wider population out there. It's really focused on food uses of corn versus feed or fuel or other potential uses of corn, and I think that's what really makes it unique as well, that we're also concerned about nutrient density, about flavor, about the sort of usability in terms of the food uses of this product. So it should be a really fun project moving forward, and it's certainly been exciting to just look at all this corn and all the diversity that's out here. So we are going to harvest this year. What we'll probably do is a pretty basic yield measurement in terms of ear number and ear weight and so forth. We actually have identified a market for the material this year as decor, which should be kind of nice to be able to actually recoup some of our investment for arrangements or centerpieces or whatever the use is going to be there. But certainly moving forward, we're going to be looking at grain quality, protein content, flavor, all of these things that unfortunately in many cases in corn breeding have been overlooked because they haven't been sort of the primary uses that people are interested in for corn. One other point I'll make, we used a fairly conventional approach to grow this year, conventional fertilizer, herbicide, but I did hand plant it with a push seeder because we only got about 100 seed of each of these varieties. So I used my earthway seeder and I pushed this out. What we ended up with is a fairly spotty stand with areas with more plants, fewer plants. But traditionally, Native Americans grew corn in hills, and they would make mounds and then they would plant corn seeds in there, and they were widely spaced because they were polycultures. You've probably heard of the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. The corn would go in the hill, The beans would be planted around the hill to grow up the corn, and then the squash would kind of grow between the hills. And that polyculture system, that dispersed planting, we don't have hills out here and we don't have beans and squash, but because of the hand planting and the difference in viability of the seed depending on which line we're talking about, we have a pretty low population in some spaces, and I think actually it's been fairly accommodating for these corn lines because of how they tend to tiller out and how historically they were growing at quite low populations. So they've done surprisingly well this year and really filled out quite nicely.
That's what's up at UPREC. Hope to see you again next time. I'm in the Gatesville, Perrinville, Dollarville, Ontonagon, Hermansville, Allenville, Randville, Eagle Harbor, Watersmeet, Matchwood, Marquette, Bergman, Germfast, Gladstone, Two Hart, Wilson,